Countries usually have 2 or 3 plans before a war, but if your aim is to rule the world, you must make countless plans. Today, in this video, we will talk about one of Hitler's countless alleged plans, the plan to invade Turkey. Now, let's rewind time a little. In 1914, the Ottoman Empire and Germany entered the war together, but by 1918 they had lost. After the lost war, 2 harsh treaties that would give birth to new wars were placed before the Ottomans and Germany, the Treaty of Sèvres and the Treaty of Versailles. While the Ottoman government and the Sultan accepted Sèvres, nationalist Turks under the leadership of Mustafa Kemal Pasha refused to accept it and started a resistance. After 3 years of resistance, they forced the relevant states to accept the Lausanne Peace Treaty, and, as if returning from the edge of a cliff, they established a new Turkish state from the ashes of the Ottoman Empire. On the German side, although nationalists voiced their objections, the Treaty of Versailles was accepted. Germany accepted the responsibility for the war, lost territory, limited its military power, and paid reparations. During this process, German nationalists looked with admiration at the Turkish resistance. One of them was Hitler, so much so that in 1923, during his failed coup attempt against the government, Hitler said that he wanted to save the homeland, just like Mustafa Kemal. Newspapers close to the Nazis frequently wrote about Ankara and Mustafa Kemal during this period. German nationalists took special interest in Turkish ambassadors. By the 1930s, this interest had grown even more. Now Hitler was in power. The fact that Hitler had taken control was watched with concern all over the world. Hitler did not suddenly start the war in 1939, of course. From the day he took power, both Hitler and Mussolini made clear the footsteps of war. For example, Hitler repeatedly violated the Treaty of Versailles. He gave the message that he wanted to expand his borders under various pretexts. For these and similar reasons, Turkey had taken precautions, signed various peace agreements, and closed the straits, the bloodiest place of the First World War, to war. Atatürk, foreseeing that entering the war would be suicide for the newly established state, willed that the Turkish nation should not enter the war, and in 1938 he lost his life for the Turkish people. 1 year later, the war whose footsteps had been heard arrived. Hitler had acted, and the Second World War officially began. Looking at the war in general, Germany, Italy, and Japan were on one side, and Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union were on the other. But the main actor of this war was, of course, Hitler's Germany. When the war started, Turkey obeyed Atatürk's wish and remained neutral, aiming to trade with both sides so that the people would not be affected by the crisis. Being a major chromium producer, Turkey became one of the most desired countries for both sides, especially Germany, because chromium was indispensable for the war industry at that time. Turkish politicians made very good use of this chromium, adding additional packages to the sale of chromium and also selling the products in the hands of farmers. But for Germany, the main goal was not just chromium. Wanting to reach oil resources, Hitler got in this process. He promised İnönü the Greek islands in order to win Turkey over to his side, but İnönü preferred to maintain his policy of neutrality. Hitler's main aim in bringing Turkey to his side was both raw materials and the desire to reach the oil of Iraq and Baku by an easier route. But İnönü's cold and cautious attitude always made Hitler suspicious. For this reason alone, he was not very willing to provide spare parts and weapons to Turkey during this process. Turkey's double game was bothering him quite a bit. Nevertheless, especially during the occupation of the Balkans, Hitler wrote a letter to İnönü.
Mr. İsmet İnönü, Ankara. Mr. President, in this war, which has been forced upon the German people against the will of the German government by the declaration of war by England and France on September 3, 1939, the present aim of the German Reich is to eliminate British influence on the European continent. This is a condition for ending the centuries-old method of wearing down European states by setting them against each other. The efforts of England to gain military influence in various parts of Europe are forcing the German Reich to take preventive measures in these areas, not for the purpose of gaining territory, but solely for security reasons. For this reason, Mr. President, I wish to inform you that, as the British initiatives to settle in Greek territory are becoming increasingly threatening, I have decided to take the countermeasures required by the situation. To this end, I have asked the Bulgarian government for permission for certain units of the German armed forces to take necessary security measures. Bulgaria, which has long been bound to Germany by friendly relations, has strengthened this friendship by joining the Tripartite Pact and being convinced that the measures to be taken are not against Turkey has given the necessary permission. I take this opportunity to inform you officially that these measures are in no way directed against the territorial integrity or political independence of Turkey. On the contrary, recalling the great and vital war we fought together and the difficult years after that war, I am firmly convinced that all the conditions for genuine friendship-based cooperation between Germany and Turkey will continue to exist in the future, because Germany has no territorial demands in these regions. German forces will leave Bulgaria and in agreement with Head of State Antonescu Romania as soon as the dangers in question are eliminated. When the war is over, the process of economic reconstruction to heal Europe's wounds will naturally bring Germany and Turkey closer together again. An important point in this regard is that Germany's interest is not only in selling its own industrial goods but also in tending to be the biggest buyer. Furthermore, I believe that the new border arrangement that will emerge after the war will in no way bring Germany into conflict with the objectives of the Turkish government. On the contrary, the rapprochement of the two states will be to the benefit of both Turkey and the Axis powers.
For this reason, I believe that as now, there will be no reason in the future to bring Germany and Turkey into conflict. With this in mind, I have ordered the German troops advancing in Bulgaria to remain far enough from the Turkish border so as not to cause any misunderstanding about their purpose in being there. However, I hope that the Turkish government will not deem it necessary to take steps that would oblige us to change this attitude. Even in such a case, Germany's determination to counter the British measures aimed at settling in Greek territory will not change. Please accept this letter as an expression of my sincere desire not to worsen relations between Germany and Turkey under any circumstances, but rather to improve them in every possible way and to arrange them in a manner that will be fruitful for both sides in the future.
Of course, you understood the hidden, veiled threat in Hitler's letter. İnönü also included subtle touches in his reply, stating that the Turkish nation would not bow to such a threat.
Mr. Chancellor, it was an honor for me to receive your personal letter sent to me through your ambassador. I sincerely thank you for your courtesy. I have informed the Republican government of the contents of your letter, and the matter has been examined with due care. As you know, since the last great war in which we participated together and shared both the honor and the suffering, the policy of the new Turkey has always remained faithful to the principles established at the beginning of our national struggle. These principles are the full guarantee of Turkish independence and the continuation of peaceful development without interfering with the rights of others. Since the spring of 1939, the policy pursued by Turkey has also been based on these principles. Turkey cannot assess its territorial integrity and security according to the form of political or military alliances of any group of states. Nor can it allow another state's victory to be the measure of its right to protect itself from attack. For this reason, Turkey is determined to resist any intervention in its sovereign domain. By the defense pact it signed, as well as by its stance in the changing circumstances of the war, Turkey has demonstrated its unshakable will to preserve its absolute independence. The Balkan policy of the Republican government has had no other aim than to keep the Balkan Peninsula away from the destruction of war. Based on the assurances given many times by your plenipotentiary ambassadors, we were justified in thinking that Germany had the same aim, and that, therefore, there was a reassuring parallel between Turkish and German policies regarding southeastern Europe. You will agree that the change in this situation is the result of reasons entirely outside Turkey's policy and attitude. Since the beginning of the Italian-Greek War, it cannot be said that my country bears the slightest responsibility for developments. We believed, and still believe, that there is no reason that would bring the Turkish and German armies face to face. As long as Germany respects the necessities of Turkey's security and independence, such a disaster is not possible. The Reich government has assured us many times that it would not make any demand from Turkey that would be incompatible with the obligations it has undertaken for this purpose. For this reason, I was pleased to learn of your desire to remove any uncertainty on this matter. I can also state to you clearly that, as in the past, the Turkish army, which will continue to serve as a vigilant guard, will act in the same way toward German troops unless the Reich government takes a step that would force the Republican government to change its stance. With all my heart, I hope that Turkish and German soldiers, who only recently shed blood together, will not take positions against each other because of temporary events. These temporary events, in my opinion, can never justify the occurrence of a disaster before history that would far exceed the framework of political or military alliances. While reading the message you sent me at a critical time in the Balkans, I had the impression that, as Führer and German Chancellor, you wanted me to express the Turkish view to you sincerely and accurately, just as you expressed the German stance to me. At a time when the world is in such a serious situation, leaders who bear responsibility to their peoples must use a language that will not lead future events to be labeled as lies. I particularly welcomed your message from this point of view. I am sure you will find in the content of my reply the expression of our joint effort to preserve relations between our two countries based on mutual understanding. This exchange of ideas you have initiated will undoubtedly contribute to the normalization and improvement of Turkish-German relations. With this hope, Mr. Chancellor, please accept my deepest respects. İsmet İnönü.
Shortly after this correspondence, the Turkish-German non-aggression pact was signed. But when the matter is Hitler, a peace agreement would hardly be reassuring. To reach his eastern oil target, Hitler had three routes: advance through Turkey, advance through the Arab lands, or eliminate the Soviets and advance from the north. Turkey waited for Germany's decision in great stress, and even German officials were divided over Turkey. But with Hitler's launch of Operation Barbarossa, Turkey breathed a deep sigh of relief. It was obvious that the German army's entry into the Soviet Union would prolong the war. President İnönü is said to have danced the Zebek when he heard of Hitler's attack on Russia. But this could only be a small postponement. After Soviet Russia, the next target could be Turkey. For Turkey, the Italian threat was as great as the German one, because since the 1930s Mussolini had repeatedly made statements targeting the Mediterranean and Turkey. While Mustafa Kemal Atatürk was alive, there was virtually a Cold War between Italy and Turkey, but Mussolini eventually backed down and declared that his words had been misunderstood. When World War II began, Italy saw Turkey as a threat to its Balkan plans. The German foreign minister also told the German ambassador to Turkey, von Papen, that if Turkey acted according to British and French interests in the Balkans, war would be inevitable. In 1940, a German journalist said, "The Russians want the Straits from you, but don't worry, in such a case, we will support you. But first you must remove ministers who look at us with hostility." Germany was saying at the time, "You are either with us or with them. Make your choice." Of course, Turkey did not remain silent to such threatening statements. Foreign Minister Refik Saydam said, "Against any move that would harm the independence of the Republic of Turkey or the integrity of the Turkish homeland, the only answer the Turkish nation will give is to take up arms and defend the homeland to the very end." Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels also wrote in his diary on June 16, 1941, "In order for the British not to have an air base against Italy, Crete had to be taken, because the Italians are not as resilient as our people. Perhaps, to get closer to Egypt, we will crush Turkey." Turkey was aware of some of these statements, so much so that a defensive line, the Çakmak line, was built against a possible attack. In Hitler's letter to İnönü, he had said, "Yitti. The Turkish government should not deem it necessary to take steps that would oblige us to change this attitude. If such a change had been necessary, the invasion plan would have taken place in 1942. In many articles, this plan is referred to as Operation Gertrude. If we were to hear the details of this operation from a Nazi commander, he would have described the invasion plan as follows.
We had planned to complete the operation within 5 weeks. Our goal was to quickly neutralize Turkey and secure the southern flank of our Caucasus front. Our land forces would enter Thrace from Bulgaria and capture Istanbul in a short time. Then the straits would be brought under control, and we would advance from the Sea of Marmara into the interior of Anatolia. A fleet of 27 ships from the Aegean Sea and the Dodecanese would support us. These ships would carry out coastal bombardment, land the landing troops on shore, and keep the logistical supply line open. Our air support would come from air bases in Kavala, Thessaloniki, and Batumi. The bomber squadrons would silence Turkish air defense lines in the first days and destroy strategic railways and bridges. On the southern front, an operation through Syria and northern Iraq would put pressure on southern Anatolia. At the same time, armored units from the Georgia-Batumi line would advance from the east and quickly capture Erzurum and Kars. Our plan was to squeeze Turkey from the north, west, south, and east at the same time. Thus, the Turkish army would be engaged on scattered fronts, making it impossible for them to establish a central defense. By the end of 5 weeks, we expected to have entered Ankara. With the completion of the operation, Turkey would either join the Axis ranks or be completely occupied. However, this plan was never implemented due to unexpected developments at the fronts and political balances.
According to some, however, such a plan was never considered. Hitler liked the Turks and supported their neutrality. Hitler did not want to open a new front by attacking Turkey. I think that if Hitler had crushed the Soviets, he would not have tolerated the presence of a neutral state right in the middle of the region. Yes, friends, that's it for this video. If you like watching narrations about World War II and Turkey, be sure to say so, because during my research I came across some very interesting information. We could make this a series. Thank you.